What if the quiet mechanic in the desert was once the Air Force's deadliest ghost pilot, called back for one impossible mission that no drone, no satellite, no modern tech could touch? When an AI weapons system reactivates and threatens to launch a global strike, only one name can override it: Echo 12. She flies with no backup, no return plan, and no glory, just skill, instinct, and a warhead. Welcome to my channel. You ever meet someone whose quiet makes the room louder? That was me. Name's Jonah Beck. I was the guy you passed without noticing. 41 years old, logistics support at a dusty forward operations compound just outside Fallbrook, California. We weren't exactly on any tourist maps. And that was the point. I cleaned rifles, filed inventory logs, and brewed the strongest pot of coffee this side of the Mojave. Everyone called me the cleaner. Not because I scrubbed toilets, though I did, but because I had a reputation for making messes disappear. Paperwork messes, storage foul-ups, ammo supply bottlenecks. You name it, I fixed it. But what they didn't know, what no one ever thought to ask, was that I used to clean messes of another kind. The kind that bled. The kind that whispered and vanished before sunrise. Back then, they called me something different. They called me Lynx. I didn't flinch at the name anymore. Not when the enemy said it over open comms like a curse. Not even when the new recruits whispered behind my back. Why does the janitor know where the perimeter gaps are? Why does he always walk through the armory with his head on a swivel? I knew how I looked. Gray in the beard, grease on my boots, that permanent 1,000-yard stare that never quite fades. I looked like a guy who spent a few too many years in the sun. And maybe I had, but I didn't miss a damn thing. Every misplaced bullet, every unsecured storage door, I saw it all. Then came that afternoon. It was blistering hot. You could fry an egg on the hood of any Humvee parked outside the command tent. I was wheeling a crate of old MREs when I heard the voice. What the hell is the cleaner doing near the command tent? Someone get him out of there. Sharp, disdainful, a young lieutenant with a fresh-pressed uniform and zero dust on his boots. The kind of guy who thought he knew everything because he'd read it in a field manual. I didn't say a word, just kept pushing the crate like I hadn't heard. Then the radios started squawking. Enemy chatter. Intercepted frequency. Every officer in that tent froze like someone hit pause. A scratchy voice came through, cold as dry ice. We want Lynx. He's there. We know. I didn't have to look around to know what came next. The tent went dead silent. Every head turned. To me. Or rather, to the empty space where I'd just been. I'd slipped out the moment I heard my name. Not the one on my ID badge. The other one. The one I buried in a classified after-action report 6 years ago, deep in the sands of Fallujah. You learn a few things when you've spent enough time in shadows. First, silence can save your life. Second, recognition can get you killed. So when I heard the name Lynx again, crawling out of a foreign radio frequency like a ghost dragging its chains, my body moved before my brain caught up. I was out the back of the command tent and halfway to the mess hall before the officers even stood up. You don't run. You disappear. There's a difference. By the time they came looking, I was scrubbing a coffee pot in the break room. My sleeves rolled up, sweat clinging to the back of my neck, grease under my fingernails. Just another faceless support tech who knew better than to step where brass walked. But inside, my chest was tight. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in years. And only a handful of people even knew it belonged to me. Most of those folks were either dead or buried in desks back at Langley. Why now? And how the hell did the enemy know I was here? That night, I sat in my bunk, lights off, fans spinning, mosquitoes humming outside the screen, and replayed the words from the Intercepted broadcast. He's there. We know. Not, we think. Not, possibly. We know. I didn't sleep. You wouldn't have either. Thing is, I hadn't always been a nobody with a mop and a clipboard. 6 years ago, I was Special Recon, Joint Operations Unit 12, operating under an umbrella group so black that even the brass upstairs used code names and emails. You never heard of us. You weren't supposed to. I was the guy they sent in when negotiations failed and good people were about to die. Desert extractions, bridge assassinations, collapsed safe houses in hostile towns. Then came Operation Ashmoth, the one that never made it to any newsreel. Everything about it was wrong. Intel felt crooked from the jump. Target locations kept changing. Communications dropped off at the worst possible times. My team was set up. Half of them were killed in an ambush 40 clicks outside Kirkuk. I pulled the last survivor out with a broken wrist, a punctured lung, and enough guilt to bury a dozen men. We were labeled Kia, dead on arrival. Officially. Unofficially, I walked out, blood-soaked and furious, and told command I wanted nothing more to do with them. They agreed, far too quickly. They gave me a new name, a new file, and a job doing civilian-adjacent logistical work at a no-name compound in California. They thought I'd go quietly, fade into the background. And for a long time I did. Until yesterday. Later that week, they handed me a trash job. Literally. "Beck," said Lieutenant Hartridge, the same man who barked at me outside the command tent. "Since you're so good at disappearing, you'll handle this waste run to the outer depot. 4-hour hike. No vehicle. Don't lose the paperwork this time." He smirked like he was doing me a favor. I just nodded, loaded up my pack, and hit the trail. It was a scorcher. Dry wind. Sharp sun. A road that wound around the ridge like a noose. Perfect place for a man to vanish if someone wanted it that way. Halfway there, I noticed movement on the upper ridge. A shimmer of something. Too far to see clearly. But it had weight. Shape. Pattern. I stopped walking. That's when I knew. This wasn't punishment. This was a setup. I dropped the duffel and took 2 slow steps toward a cluster of rocks, like I was stretching my back. My eyes stayed fixed on the ridge above, just under the brim of my hat. I kept it subtle, always subtle. You don't stare down a shadow unless you're prepared to make it blink. There it was again, a glint of glass. Optics. High grade. Not sunlight on a beer bottle. Someone was watching. Not tracking. Not patrolling. Watching me. Now, I hadn't carried a sidearm in months. Not since they reassigned me to non-lethal duties. So the only thing I had was a pocket knife, a dented thermos of lukewarm coffee, and 19 years of tactical memory that hadn't rotted away just yet. I reached into my pack and pulled out the thermos. Unscrewed it. Took a swig. To anyone observing, I was just a sweating old logistics guy taking a break. But behind that casual sip, I was counting seconds. Watching wind direction. Timing the glint. Whoever they weren't trying to be seen, but they weren't exactly hiding either. Which meant they wanted me to know I was being watched. That ridge wasn't just high ground. It was a message. "We see you. We remember." So I gave them a message back. I turned my body slightly, just enough to let the sun catch the old metal patch still pinned beneath my collar, the tarnished symbol of Joint Ops Unit 12. Most folks mistook it for a coin or a trinket. But if you knew, you knew. And apparently, they did. Because the shimmer vanished. Whoever was up there pulled back. But not because they were afraid. They'd confirmed what they needed. I was Lynx. And I was no longer forgotten. I delivered the paperwork to the depot. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. The clerk stamped it like it was another box of gloves or 4 tubes, and sent me on my way. But on the hike back, something didn't sit right. That ridge encounter had the fingerprints of a test, the kind I used to run during advanced recon drills. But this time, I was the subject. Which meant the enemy wasn't guessing anymore. They were confirming. Back at base, the tension was so thick you could drag a knife through the air and it'd stick. In the comms room, I passed by a wall of screens and caught something in the corner. A map with a blinking red dot over Ridge Sector 6, exactly where I'd seen the shimmer. "Routine recon," the tech said when he saw me staring. I didn't answer. Just walked on. That night, I skipped the mess hall. Sat outside my bunk instead, stripping and cleaning a flashlight that hadn't worked in 6 months, mostly to keep my hands busy. I was listening, waiting, and sure enough, the radio hissed. Unsecured. A low-band signal. Confirmation received. Target is in play. Repeat. Lynx is confirmed alive. I closed my eyes. Felt the familiar burn in my gut. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was the sound of a quiet life dying. The next morning, everything broke wide open. The siren didn't even sound like a real alert at first. More like an old diesel engine trying to cough itself awake. But then the second tone hit. Sharp. High. A frequency that made the fillings in your teeth vibrate. I was already up and lacing my boots before the lights started flashing red outside the barracks. Perimeter breach, southwest quadrant. All QRF units to post. I wasn't QRF anymore. Not by a long shot. But as I stepped into the corridor, I saw something that made me pause mid-stride. Private Jenkins, jittery, fresh out of Fort Sam, all spine and no scars, sprinted by me, eyes wide as headlights. He was holding his rifle wrong. No helmet, no ear protection. He looked like a kid running into a thunderstorm with a toy umbrella. And that's when I knew they weren't ready. Not for what was coming. I grabbed my old duffel, the one marked linens that no one ever inspected, and unzipped it for the first time in months. Inside was a single lockbox. Rusted hinges. Code lock still functional. I punched in the numbers like my fingers remembered the rhythm better than my brain. Click. Inside lay a sidearm. Matte black, no serial, and a folded nylon holster. Below that, a small leather-bound book. No words on the cover. Just a symbol. A lynx, fangs bared, tail curling over the spines of 3 dead branches. The patch of my old unit. I strapped the holster under my shirt, checked the chamber, and walked toward the comms room like a man clocking into his first real shift in years. It was chaos in there. Alarms blaring, screens flickering, techs shouting over each other like seagulls at a shipwreck. I scanned the screens. The southwest feed had already cut out. The drones were blind in that quadrant. Too much jamming, too fast to be natural. Who's in there? I asked. The lead comm tech, a nervous contractor named Lee, turned toward me, startled. 4-man recon patrol. Bravo squad. They haven't checked in for 13 minutes. We lost drone visuals 6 minutes ago. I didn't hesitate. Send the coordinates to my tablet. He blinked. You're not cleared for. Do it. I said, quieter this time. Slower. He did. Within 10 minutes, I was on a borrowed ATV, headed toward Ridge Sector 4. No questions. No fanfare. Just dust, heat, and the hum of something old and violent rising from the bones of this place. I found them at the edge of a dry wash. 2 were alive, pinned behind a boulder riddled with bullets. 1 was unconscious, crumpled 10 feet away in the open. The last, well, he wouldn't be writing letters home. I didn't need orders. Didn't need a command chain. I just moved. For calculated shots from my sidearm. 1 through a helmet visor, 2 through brush shadows. The last a guess based on a glimpse of motion. That 1 hit home, too. Old instincts never left. They just waited their turn. Within 7 minutes, the squad was safe, stabilized, and I'd called in medevac. You're just logistics. One of them stammered as I handed him a canteen. You're the guy who mops the floor near the comms hub. Not today, I said. Back at base, things got even stranger. 30 minutes after I returned, enemy transmissions were intercepted again, same voice as before. But this time, it was panicked. He's active. Lynx is alive. Withdraw. Withdraw immediately. That did it. Every officer in that room stopped cold. Eyes went to the base commander, then to the spot where I stood, still in my dust-covered coveralls, blood on one sleeve that wasn't mine. Hartridge, the cocky lieutenant who sent me on that waste run, went pale. The base commander didn't blink. He reached for the encrypted terminal and keyed in a clearance code I hadn't heard in years. Then he looked straight at me. Sergeant Jonah Beck, former designation Lynx. Report to my office. Now. I didn't argue. The ghosts were awake now, and they weren't going back to sleep. His office smelled like old paper and gun oil. Colonel Matthias Warner wasn't the kind of man who played politics. He had a face carved by deployments, not debates. Bronze skin, white eyebrows, and hands like they'd wrestled history into place. I hadn't spoken a word since stepping inside. Neither had he. He just stared at me, or rather, past me, like he was looking through years of classified reports and sealed files I knew he'd never been cleared to see. Finally, he spoke. Sit down, Sergeant. I did. He remained standing, back to the window, arms behind his back. Silence stretched until the only sound was the slow tick of a wall clock that hadn't worked since the base opened. Your name came across my desk once, Warner said finally. About 6 years ago. Special Recon. Operation Ashmoth. He didn't say the words classified disaster, but they hung in the air like smoke. I assumed it was a mistake, he continued, because the file said status, Kia, and yet here you are, mopping floors, delivering coffee. By choice, I said. He turned, eyes narrowing. So the rumors were true. What rumors? That you were the only survivor. I looked him in the eye. I wasn't the only survivor. I was the only one who made it back breathing. That stopped him, just for a moment. Then he walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and slid a folder across the surface. The kind of folder that didn't exist unless you were in a room where phones were banned and security keys were required just to breathe. The cover read, Project Reclaimer, Phoenix Protocol Tier Red. He nodded toward it. Go ahead. I know you remember the clearance tiers. I did. Inside were photos, satellite shots, intercepts, maps of transport corridors weaving through neutral zones, zones that shouldn't be active, the kind of routes only someone with joint operations background would know to use. But the photos weren't what hit hardest. It was the final page. A grainy image pulled from drone footage. A man exiting a civilian cargo plane, wearing a field jacket 2 decades out of date, but bearing a symbol I hadn't seen since Ashmoth. The patch from our old unit. Someone's using our tactics, I muttered. They're not just using them, Warner said. They're mimicking your entire playbook. Loadout patterns, recon timings, even the old SAN signal code you created for blackout extractions. I closed the folder. My stomach turned. This isn't copycat, I said. This is legacy. Someone on the inside trained them. And not just someone from Joint Ops, someone from my team. Warner leaned forward, voice low. You think it's Trevor Blake? The name hit like a bullet. Captain Trevor Blake. My second in command. The man who went missing during Ashmoth. Whose body we never found. Whose last known words over radio were, they're inside the net. Burn it all. I don't know, I lied. But I did know. I knew it in my gut the second I saw that symbol in the drone still. The angle of his walk. The way he held his rifle with the shoulder dip that came from shrapnel lodged just above the collarbone. Trevor had taught me that hold himself. He was listed MIA, I said. Yeah, so were you. I stood. What do you want from me, Colonel? Warner didn't answer right away. Then, your mission is over, Lynx. That was the deal. You got out. You went quiet. But someone else picked up where you left off. And now that your name's out there again, they're hunting you. He walked to the window and looked out over the base. But maybe they're not the only ones who should be. When I left that office, the sun was dipping behind the ridgeline. Everything felt too bright, too loud. I walked back to my bunk in silence. But in my head, the war had already started again. Only this time, I wasn't being pulled back into it. I was walking in on my own. And someone out there, someone who used to be family, was going to have to answer for what came next. That night, I pulled the storage crate from beneath my bunk, the one marked janitorial spares, and opened the false bottom. Everything was still there. Kevlar vest with the ceramic plate still intact. Tactical goggles. And the small black sat phone, stripped of GPS, untraceable unless you knew the 6-digit trigger phrase embedded in the firmware. I turned it on. No signal bars. That was normal. It didn't run off towers. It ran off ghosts. I tapped in the phrase. 7 Lima, X-ray, Delta, 1-3. The screen flickered. Then a slow scroll of green text. Initiating reclaimer handshake. Channel, Predator silent. Contact, Lynx status, confirmed. Stand by for protocol relay. Then the message I hadn't expected. Blake is alive. Unit 12 compromised. Your orders, track and neutralize. Contact operator Shade. El Paso, Safe House 14. Window, 48 hours. I sat there staring at the words. My thumb hovered over the power button, but I didn't shut it off. I just whispered, Trevor, what the hell did you do? Trevor Blake wasn't a villain. He was better than me. Smarter. Calmer. We called him the flashlight. Not because he lit the way, but because he always knew where the edge of darkness was. He'd saved my life twice. Covered me in smoke once when a kill mission went sideways in southern Yemen. Later, when we were stuck in a collapsed safe house outside Mosul, bleeding and deaf from a failed detonation, Trevor carried a satchel full of intel 6 miles on foot just to get it back to ops. And now they were saying he'd gone rogue? No, not Trevor. Not unless something had broken inside him after Ashmoth. And if it had, I'd have to be the one to find out. By dawn, I was off base. Officially, I was on medical leave for heat exhaustion. That's what Warner listed in the report. But I saw the look in his eyes when he signed the form. He wasn't protecting me. He was releasing me. Back into the field. Back into the hunt. The drive to El Paso took 11 hours. I kept the windows down. Let the desert wind strip the silence off my bones. The sat phone stayed dark, but I kept it on the passenger seat like an old friend. Just outside of town, I turned off the main road and cut behind an abandoned tire yard. There was a broken fence and a rusted sign hanging sideways. Soto refrigeration, no trespassing. Safe House 14. They never looked like much. Inside was dim, quiet. The kind of place where even the dust moved slowly. An old vending machine had been gutted, and turned into a weapons locker. And sitting on a crate in the corner was Shade. Or rather, the woman I used to call Shade. She looked older, sharper. Silver now streaked her black hair. She wore a worn tactical vest over a denim shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her boots were scuffed from use, not fashion. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She just said, "You took your time." I nodded. Didn't want to show up to a ghost town too early. She gestured to a map pinned to the wall. It was covered in red circles and black thread. Border towns, supply routes, old ghost airfields. And in the center, circled in dark blue ink, Sierra Verde. A supposedly abandoned listening station built during the Cold War, halfway between the Davis Mountains and a whole lot of nothing. "He's there," she said. "Or at least, that's where his people are broadcasting from." I stepped closer. "And you're sure it's Blake?" She tapped a grainy photo pinned to the bottom corner of the board. 3 days ago, a former asset from Unit 12 showed up at a weapons meet outside Juarez. Wore your team's patch. Walked like Trevor. Sounded like him, too. I looked at the image. It was blurry, but I knew that stance. My stomach twisted. Why would he go dark like this? I asked. Shade didn't answer at first. Then she said something I hadn't considered. Maybe he thinks we're the traitors. The road to Sierra Verde felt like driving into a grave. Just sand, rock, and heat so thick it got into your lungs. Shade and I didn't talk much. Nothing left to say. We'd both buried too many friends, too many secrets. The kind of silence that weighs more than noise. By dusk, we reached the outer fence. Rusted coils, long dead cameras. Looked abandoned, sure, but we weren't amateurs. We circled wide, scouted for signs. And we found them. Fresh tire tracks, unburied trash, a broken branch near a blind spot in the tree line, subtle, but not natural. Someone was living here, or staging. We waited until nightfall. Then we went in. Inside, the compound was cold. Too cold for a desert ruin. Power was running somewhere. I found a vent blowing air and followed it down a hall into the main chamber. That's where we saw the wall. Dozens of photos. Redacted files. Military reports I hadn't seen since Ashmoth. Our old team. All of us. Marked with excess. All except two. Me. And Blake. On the wall was a scrawled message in marker. They burned US. Who burns them? Shade swore under her breath. Then we heard the voice behind us. You finally came, Jonah. Trevor Blake stepped out of the shadows. He hadn't aged much. But his eyes? They were wrong. Colder. Emptier. Like something inside had snapped and never healed right. Why? I asked. He smiled. Hollow. They left us to die. I lived. So now I'm making sure they can't do it to anyone else. You're running ops, I said. Recruiting off the books. No, he said. I'm building what they were too afraid to finish. Real justice. Real retribution. And I need you. He stepped forward. You came back for a reason, Lynx. So come with me. I looked at him. At the friend I'd trusted with my life. And realized he was gone. Whoever this was, it wasn't Trevor Blake anymore. I need you, Jonah, he said again. You trained half of them already. You just didn't know it. I shook my head. You're using our tactics on civilians. Friendly forces. Contractors. You ambushed Bravo Squad. His smile faded. They weren't targets. They were tests. I wanted to see if you still had it. I stepped closer. You murdered Callan. Left Baker to die in that ditch. Trevor looked at the floor. There's always a cost. You sound like Langley, I said. He flinched. There it was, the crack. Guilt, still alive under all that frost. But he buried it quick. I don't care how it sounds. I'm cleaning up a dirty game. You think hiding on base scrubbing mugs is redemption? No, I said. But it's better than becoming the thing we swore to stop. His jaw clenched. Behind me, Shade moved, slow, quiet, sliding toward cover. She was reading him too. The tilt of his stance. The flex in his fingers. He was about to draw. And he did. But I was faster. One shot, clean through the shoulder. He dropped the pistol with a scream and collapsed against the wall of photos. He looked at me, wild-eyed, like a betrayed prophet. You could have joined me, he spat. We could have fixed it. I knelt beside him. You don't fix fire with more fire. I pulled a sat beacon from my belt and pressed the call button. 10 seconds later, the signal blinked green. Extraction incoming. By the time the chopper came, Trevor had passed out. Shade cuffed him, sat back, and stared at the wall of names. They'll bury this, you know, she said. Wipe it clean, like we were never here. Probably, I said. But I took one photo, just one, and slid it into my vest. It was our unit. Unit 12. Before Ashmoth. Smiling. Whole. People worth remembering. People worth protecting. They flew us out under blackout protocol. No names, no records, no questions. Trevor was sedated. Guarded. Headed to a place where even maps go quiet. I spent the next 48 hours in a windowless room near Andrews. Debriefed by men who didn't introduce themselves and never took off their sunglasses. They didn't ask why I went rogue, just how I'd gotten back. And when I gave them the details, they nodded, typed it all into silence, then handed me a sealed folder. Inside was one page. Links, reactivated. Asset discretionary. Location left to operator. It was their way of saying, you're not off the hook, but you're no longer in the doghouse. Shade met me at the airstrip. She handed me coffee. No words. Didn't need any. Back at base, the story was already spreading. Some said a contractor had saved the recon team. Others claimed it was a ghost from deep black ops. No one said my name, and I didn't correct them. I went back to cleaning gear and refilling supply crates. Just like before. Only now, every soldier nodded when they passed. Quiet respect. No jokes. Lieutenant Hartridge even saluted once. Awkward, but sincere. Thank you, he muttered. I just nodded. No forgiveness needed. I hadn't come back for that. That night, I took out the photo I'd swiped, the one of my old unit, and pinned it behind my locker door. 12 faces. One traitor. Still, I kept it. Not to remember the fall. To remember who we'd been before it. And what I still owed them. 6 months later, the desert was still hot, the coffee still weak, and the mornings still came too early. But something had changed. The base ran tighter now. Patrols sharper. Supply chain smoother. The new recruits asked better questions. And when they listened, they really listened. Every Thursday, I ran a short session in the shade behind the comms building. Unofficial, off the books. Just field basics, they called it. But we all knew what it really was. Legacy control. Passing the good stuff forward so the bad stuff wouldn't win again. One morning, a young corporal, Martinez, handed me a folded scrap of paper. I found this in the archives, sir. Thought you might want it. It was an old mission log. Ashmoth. All redacted, all burned black. Except one line. Links held the line longer than anyone had a right to. I folded it and tucked it into the same vest pocket that still held that photo of Unit 12. Some scars you don't erase. Some names you don't forget. And some people, even when they disappear, never stop serving. People still think heroism looks like speeches or medals or movies. They're wrong. Sometimes it's a mop and a checklist. Sometimes it's a quiet word when a young soldier's hands are shaking. Sometimes it's showing up again and again, even when no one claps. Because survival is a form of service. And silence, sometimes, is strategy. I don't know how much longer I'll be here. Probably until someone decides I've outlived my usefulness again. But until then, I'll keep showing up. Keep watching. Keep teaching. Because war doesn't stop when the bullets do. It stops when enough people remember why we fight in the first place. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we get the chance to help them remember